Hmm. Nope. This way. Hello, hello, hello. Um, I had a call right before this that I was not planning to have. So, I'm a little bit late to get things together, but I am excited to review this paper with everyone. Um, actually, a quick question for everyone before I get started is that I've really enjoyed doing all these streams. And I'm curious as to whether this is something that you'd be interested in seeing on my channel like more than once a month. So at like a regularly scheduled time, where I think sometimes we'd review papers, sometimes we could talk about AI simulated drones and how that sounded like someone LARPing and stuff, and what's going on in AI Twitter and things like that. So I'd love to hear whether or not that's something that you guys are interested in seeing on the channel more, because I guess I would say I still love making long form videos. Um, and I don't think that that's going to change. But I also really like interacting with you guys in real time because it's a lot of fun. Um, I also figured out how to use OBS. So um, when I switch over to the paper, things should be easier to see. If there's stuff going on, I can see you guys in the chat here as well. And we can troubleshoot things a little bit more in real time than we have before. Because, yeah, the last stream I did was something that I really hadn't done before. So we are learning as we go, and that's okay. So let's get to this month's paper. So this is our paper. The title of the paper is Choose Your Weapon, Survival Strategies for Depressed AI Academics. And this was a paper that I came across on Twitter. I thought it was a joke, if I'm being totally honest. I fully thought this was someone doing this ironically. And I don't know that I care whether or not it is ironic. I don't know that that matters that much to me. But I thought it was a funny and interesting paper because I do definitely feel like if you are, especially someone who works in the large language model space, the AI world has been, you know, taken over by industry. It's definitely industry. Places like OpenAI and Microsoft and Google are taking up a lot of the PR space, a lot of the airspace around these topics. And so I thought this would be a really interesting paper to go through because it's just like, I don't work in this space, luckily for me, but it is something that I've heard about a lot in terms of people in the field definitely having some concerns. So, to start off the introduction, um, I think I can do a brief read through. So, as someone who does AI research in a university, you develop a complicated relationship to the corporate AI research powerhouses such as DeepMind, OpenAI, Google Brain, Meta AI. That's definitely true. Um, on one hand, it's very impressive. And on the other hand, how could we possibly keep up? And so, this was actually the thing that drew me to this paper because, you know, as an AI academic leading a lab with a few PhD students, this kind of research is not possible to do. Even when things like GPT-4 were released, you can't necessarily do the level of research that companies like OpenAI and DeepMind and Brain and Meta can do in the first place. I will say, and I guess I'm a little bit curious, that isn't to, I guess, diss the open source community, because the open source community has been doing amazing things to the point that people in industry are concerned. um, but I do think that it's certainly a concern for anyone in academia. And also, I'd be curious as to whether you'd like to see more coverage on the channel about things happening in the open source space, because that's not a space that I have a ton of experience with. And I think it would be very cool to dive into it and maybe platform people who are in that space, if that would be of interest to you. Ultra Soda says that I'd love that actually. Awesome. Okay, cool. Yeah. I know my stream is a little bit on a lag, so I'm like, if there's silence, it's because I'm like waiting 10 seconds for people to reply in the chat. But yeah, I think that that'd be really, really cool to do, because it is a space that I just don't have a ton of experience with. Also, if you have any, I don't know, things that I should look at, things that you'd be interested in having me cover, I suppose, definitely drop that in the chat and I will check those out. So, getting back to the paper. So I guess we can look at the abstract of this paper, and it is, I think, a little bit ironic and a little bit not. But the thesis is that a growing number of AI academics can no longer find the means and resources to compete at a global scale. This is a fairly recent phenomenon, but it's accelerating. And so here we discuss what you can do to stay competitive while remaining an academic. We can also discuss what universities and the private sector can do to improve the situation if they are so inclined. Obviously, this is not an exhaustive list of strategies, but similar to the stream, it is designed to start a discussion. So, I debated on whether or not to do this paper, and when I was looking originally at the introduction, I thought it was interesting, and then I got to chapter 2, and I thought that it was funny, because chapter 2 is, or section 2, is give up. This is a fascinating. I won't say fascinating. I think it's funny. I think that this is something that's been, I don't know, in the back of the minds of a lot of people who are in this space and who are concerned about where things are going, especially if you are an academic in the large language model space, in the foundation model space. If you don't go to if you don't work at MIT or Stanford, it can be hard to be motivated to do this kind of work. So I thought that was very funny to see as part of the first steps as a list of ideas for what you could do if you are an A academic despairing about your options. And I think it's certainly funny. I think this is really funny. I'm curious as to whether other people also think this is funny. I would also definitely say that, I guess I would say I don't want to warn people off of language models if this is an area that you're super interested in getting into, especially large language models. What I would say is that my sense of things is that it's just a very hard field to get into these days. And if I'm wrong, please let me know in the chat. I'd love to hear about more opportunities on this front. But the sense that I've gotten is that if you're interested in building large language models in particular, so not necessarily looking at language models from another perspective, but if things like GPT are what you're interested in, that field is very much saturated by the likes of OpenAI and Meta and DeepMind and things like that. So I think it's a very funny thing to lead with as kind of the first main section. But I also, especially if you're running a lab, you need to think about how you're going to fund the lab, pay students, things like that. I don't think it's fully unreasonable, which might be a hot take. I don't know. The next section is try scaling anyway. So it starts off with going head to head with an overwhelming competition is an admirable sentiment. If scaling works, let's do it in our new university labs. Let's go tilting at windmills, GPU fans. So yeah, the most obvious problem, as mentioned here, is access to computational resources. So even if you secure $50,000 of funding for cloud compute, this is quite small compared to something like training a GPT-3. The recent, where is it? Yeah, so the recent AI agent that learned to craft a diamond pickaxe in Minecraft, I did a video on my channel, I think like a year ago actually about this. Took 9 days of training on 720 V100 GPUs, which is, in the three to kind of $500,000 USD standpoint. Which, like, if you're in academia, most grants don't support stuff like this. They do support things in the millions of dollars range, but they don't necessarily support you spending those millions of dollars specifically on compute and not on like other things that come with academia, like paying your students and things like that. So I thought that this was, yeah, most members of a typical, here we go. Most members of a typical academic research lab in computer science are PhD students that need to graduate within a few years in an individual project to work on, which results in multiple first author papers so they can get a job. And so I think the scaling problem or the scaling approach definitely makes that kind of thing harder if you're focused on academia. I should say, I think there are, how many sections are there? Technically 17, functionally less than that. But unlike the last paper on early signs of artificial general intelligence, this will be a faster live stream. So, another approach. This was the section that I think made me want to do this on a live stream, and that is to scale down. I guess I would say it's not just this section, but it's kind of everything after this, because I do think that and I'll say a lot of this is discourse on AI Twitter, which like is a microcosm itself that isn't representative, but a lot of the advice that you see there is basically like, if you're in academia, either like quit or try to compete with these massive tech companies. And obviously the latter doesn't seem to be actually feasible, but the former almost feels like giving up too soon. So I appreciate the fact that there are, I can't do math, 14 other options on this paper. And that was the thing that made this kind of an interesting paper for me to dive into. So, scaling down. This section basically focuses on what if you focus on kind of smaller representative problems. I think that depending on the niche that you're in, this could actually be, I think that in a lot of niches, this is what is happening. If you, especially, I guess healthcare isn't necessarily a small problem space, but this is definitely a space where I think there's a lot of interesting work being done that isn't necessarily generalizable, but is interesting, and where there's certainly a lot of work to be done in the first place. Section 5 focuses on reuse and remaster. I think this actually focuses more on basically taking existing resources. So I pay for access to the OpenAI API. I also pay for ChatGPT Plus. So using access to those kinds of things to um, tailor them to your own specific problem. And I'm curious as to whether or not anyone has done that themselves in the chat, if you've been using the API, um, and what you've been using it for, because I have found it to be super interesting to play with. But so far, I've not done anything that I would release to the public, but I'm curious as to whether anyone else is. Um, the comment that they make here is that unfortunately, the fine tuning and post hoc analysis of these large models is often not enough for good performance. This is true. Um, a lot of the time, you look at, so actually, something that I've been thinking about doing a video on, if you saw my YouTube short slash reel slash TikTok, on a Wired article that delved into how much of Common Crawl, which is the data set that we believe underlies models, that we believe underlies large language models like GPT-4. A lot of that is scraped from the internet, which means a lot of it is fan fiction. And I grew up reading fan fiction. I still read fan fiction. But essentially, what ended up kind of slipping in unintentionally is fan fiction tropes that you really only see in that community, in like the archive of our own and like Tumblr space, and that is something that you can pull out if you prompt GPT-3 correctly. But I in that line, I've been curious. I've been meaning to potentially do a video that basically, I don't think it would be one video because I feel like this would take several hours, but it would be a video that like looks at Common Crawl and it like unpacks the different things that went into that data set. And so like some of that is fan fiction and like Wattpad and things like that. Some of that is Reddit. A lot of it is Reddit. Some of it is like Stack Overflow. Some of it's other stuff. But I'm curious as to whether or not you think that would be an interesting video in the first place, because I'm personally deeply curious as to whether or not, like, what percentage of Common Crawl is fan fiction, and I'd also like to learn more about what else goes into it. So, if that's something that you think would be interesting, let me know in the chat. Mm. This is not an advertisement for the Stanley Cup, but like if you have trouble drinking enough water every day, this thing has saved my life. Anyway, so the sixth section is analysis instead of synthesis. This section focuses on analyzing these pre-trained models. I think a lot of people are doing this, especially actually if you're interested in doing this from an open source perspective. If you're not an academic, if you're not interested in like getting a PhD or like whatever it is, there are a ton of opportunities to do things like this. If you have questions about how language models work, how GPT-4 works, like you can do this yourself. I'd highly recommend doing it if that's something that you're interested in, because I think it's really cool. And I think it can be a really great learning experience. I've personally always been someone who has learned better by experimenting and running my own experiments than by following the exact instructions of other people. So if that's up your alley, then I'd totally recommend doing it. And I think that this is kind of an important point. You can do analysis with different mindsets, with different approaches, with different underlying assumptions. And so if you, regardless of whether or not you decide to publish your results in any way, I would definitely recommend doing your best to like put down in words what the underlying assumptions of your experiment are, because everyone has them. Like it's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing to have personal biases and personal experiences that guide your thinking and your approach to experimentation. But it is important in terms of contextualizing experiments, and I think that that's a bit of an underrated thing in this field these days. All right, section 7, reinforcement learning. This is so I mentioned this in the last stream. I don't read these papers before I go on live to review them. So I am reading this section in real time. Okay. So the idea is, in theory, you can need less data to run reinforcement learning systems. Um, yeah, I was gonna say following an RL path might allow you to bypass all of the issues related to data availability, its analysis, storage, and handling. It does not, however, minimize the computational effort required. Yeah. Um, so even though you might need less data in terms of RL systems, um, they are, yeah, known to be fairly computationally heavy, because reinforcement learning is finding that balance between exploration and exploitation. And initially, in I guess I would say, in my experience, in a large percentage, I guess, of the time spent training these systems, you're in the exploration stage, and that just is computationally expensive. Um, Moreover, shaping a reward function often involves forms of black art or practical wisdom. I don't agree. Sorry, I don't disagree with that. Reward functions are challenging to create. I've made videos on this in the past. I think I worry often that people see the videos on like how to make AI fair, and one of the things that I talk about is making sure that you're optimizing for the correct thing. Um, that's not easy. Like that's legitimately a hard thing to do sometimes. If you think that the equation that you've created is optimizing for the correct outcome, and then there are just assumptions or priors that you didn't realize you were making. Like that's, I feel like, I guess this is a little bit of an aside that we can talk about here. Would it be possible to slightly scale down your camera because it's covering text? Yes, there we go. Um, cool. So something that I think about a lot when it comes to reward functions and kind of the fairness and bias community more broadly, and the research that goes into it, is that I feel like, and this just might be me, and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts in the comments, but I feel like people often take fairness and bias related feedback personally. And like, I'm a people pleaser. Like, I also take things very personally. So I get it. But I often feel like people, researchers or people behind preprints and published papers, if someone says like, oh, like, you know, this analysis is interesting, you might want to consider XYZ. It becomes it becomes similar to calling someone racist, I guess is the best way to put it. It becomes similar to almost a pejorative. And I wish that weren't the case, um, because I think that there is a lot to be gained from feedback, and I don't. I'm like, I'm not super interested in saying that someone who is, or a team of people that develop an algorithm that ends up being biased. I'm not super interested in saying that they're like racist or sexist or whatever. I'm much more interested in helping them develop better systems and helping them, you know, fill the blind spots that they may or may not have in the process of developing these systems in the first place. So that's all to say that this whole phrase on shaping a reward function often involves a form of black art or practical wisdom. I think is true. I think that this is true for optimization generally. The thing that you're trying to do or the problem that you're trying to solve is often nuanced in a million ways that you might have considered in a million other ways that you haven't, or that you haven't thought to, or that you haven't had the lived experience to. And I think that's why I'm a huge proponent of like increased diversity in AI research and AI industry. Um, but I also, yeah, I think it would be really cool if it weren't a bad thing for someone to approach you and be like, "Hey, your system is biased," and you'd be like, "Cool." Like, how do I change that? This is the thing that I was trying to optimize for. Things like that. So those are my thoughts on that front. Very quickly, I'm going to switch over to the starting soon side of OBS. I am on OBS now, and I think I know how to use it. So I can take a very quick bathroom break. All right, we're back. I did see someone. I guess they deleted their comment in the chat, which like I don't know. If you have a comment in the chat, feel free to say it, even if you think I'm going to be offended. I don't care. I'm happy to address them. But the comment in the chat that I saw was basically like, isn't the idea of addressing every possible bias and accounting for all of these things isn't this the entire point of like kind of AI alignment and safety research? And I would say like very broadly speaking, yes. What I would also say is that I think that in most cases for these kinds of things, we're often talking about narrow AI. And so the goal isn't necessarily to, you know, develop AGI, which I thought about having this be a live stream where I talked about the like AI letter this week and the tweet that I put out that people were upset about and my thoughts on AGI and existential risk. We can do that after this paper if people want. But I decided not to make that a video because it's something that I have a lot of thoughts on. But I think that is a much larger problem that I think is legitimately challenging, and I think that's where alignment work comes in. It's also very hypothetical at this point, and so I think that also the Vice article. I guess question for people in it watching and in the chat. I've thought about doing this. I don't know if it would be great for my mental health, if I'm being totally honest. But I've thought about doing like live stream recaps of like AI Twitter this week, because AI Twitter this week was nuts, and I don't know if that'd be interesting to you, but it was certainly fascinating. So if that's something that people would be interested in hearing about, let me know. Because I was definitely way too involved in it, and I would like to be less involved in the future. Anyway, my point is that I think that in the cases of things like this paper, we're not trying to solve the alignment problem. We're trying to, in the example of um, the example that I provide in the how can we make AI fairer video is like the Nature paper that cataloged a healthcare system that used machine learning to decide which patients needed higher levels of care, and it turns out that the thing that they inadvertently optimized for was how much money you spend on healthcare, which if you are a person of color, you spend less money on healthcare because of medical bias and like things like that. And so even if you are equivalently sick to someone who is not a person of color, you might get downranked in that system. So that's more so where I think in terms of being aware of biases and also just not taking that personally. Similarly to the last section, the section 8 is small models, so focusing less on compute. This is looking especially at IoT, so like edge computing. I did a video on this a while back. It also looks at the green AI side of things, climate change and AI, which is something that I'm super interested in, that I'm hoping to do more videos on in the latter part of this year. So if there are any topics that you think would be cool to hear about, definitely let me know, because I'm looking for topics. I think that both of these are certainly interesting fields that I think that more people should look into. I think that there should be more investment in climate change and AI. I know that there are multiple workshops and things like that focus on this. So not to undervalue those things, but I certainly think that there should be more focused on that, and maybe not a little bit less on scaling. You guys know from my channel that like making language models and whatever models even bigger is like not something that I'm personally interested in a ton. I'm happy to cover it on the channel, but when it comes to my own personal interest, it's kind of like, cool, you made your model 0.05% better, and that's not my space necessarily unless something unusual is happening there. But I think that it would be definitely cool to see more work in efficient systems, efficient AI systems. So we'll see what happens. And also, there will probably be a video coming in the next week or two that delves into work at the intersection of like climate and AI. So stay tuned for that. Section 9, work on specialized application areas or domains. This is kind of the applied side of things. This is what I do, which I never talk about on the channel because it's confidential, and that's all I'm going to say about that. But I certainly think this is important. And I feel like when I talk to people about getting into AI, especially if you're like not interested in the theory side of things, this is usually where I tell people to look. Partially because the LLM side of things is just like, there's a lot of people doing that, and I feel like I'm hoping, this is not job advice, I'm hoping that specialized applications will be more in vogue in the next few years because I'm excited for them and I think they're going to be really cool. I think solve problems few people care about for now is in a similar vein to what I just said. In particular, yes. Look around you and talk to people who are not AI researchers. What problem domains do you see where AI is rarely applied and where AI researchers seem to not know or care about? Might someone care about those domains in the future? Yes. Do this, please. This section is the area that I am interested and passionate about. I think yeah, this is the part that I'm excited about. This is part of the reason why I want to do this paper. And this is something that I'm definitely interested in doing more work in and making more content around. But this is also something that I recommend getting into if you're interested in getting into AI and you want to do something that like isn't trending on Twitter every 12 hours. 11, try things that shouldn't work. This is an interesting one, partially because I just had a meeting with my advisor, one of my advisors, who recommended for reasons that I won't get into, but I was running into issues with the thing, and his advice was if what you're doing isn't working, try the opposite. And so far, it's been very helpful. But I think that the underlying thought, yeah, is that you know failure can be as instructive and valuable as success, and the stakes are often lower. So if you're doing something and it's not working, or if you want to try something and you think it shouldn't work, do it. Like, at the end of the day, failure is information, and you can learn from it and you can build from it. And we actually, there's I think an annual event at MIT that's called Fail at MIT, something like that. And I think it's really cool because a lot of the folks at the event is just talking about like how faculty, Nobel Prize winners, not that you need to do this in order to win a Nobel Prize, please do not go into whatever you do trying to do stuff like that. But how people who are now, renowned in their field, failed often and learn from that, and also tried things that were contrary to everything that leaders in their field advised, and either ended up working in the case of one of my advisors, or didn't, and they learned from it. And I think that's pretty underrated. I think that it's something that I definitely still struggle with, but it's something that I'm trying to lean into more, and I think that it'll be cool. 12, do things that have bad optics. Oh boy. Like I said, I haven't read this paper before I went live, so I'm gonna take like a quick second to scan through this before I say anything. As an individual researcher, you can do things as crazy as you like. You are only constrained by the law and your own personality. We are not in any way arguing that you should do research that is unethical, but what you find objectionable might be very different from what a group of mostly white, liberal, overeducated engineers in the coastal US find objectionable. One of us participated in a project that critically examined the normativity of neutral English. All right, okay. I was worried about this section. Genuinely, I think it's cool now. um, I think the part that should probably be bolded is the like, don't do anything like harmful or unethical, like do the right thing, morally speaking and ethically speaking. Don't hurt people, etc., etc. Please don't. Yeah, do things that don't harm people. But I do think that this is kind of an interesting statement, because I think that a lot of the work that goes on the fairness side of things kind of falls into the category of things that have bad optics. And I think this ties into what I was saying earlier around like you look at Timna and Debraji and God, someone else who I'm totally blanking on their name of that I should totally remember and I will bring up after this. But their paper auditing facial recognition systems, like for them, that kind of had bad optics because, they ended up getting death threats and people were harassing them and they still get a lot of that. Um, because, people felt like they were being too sensitive or that they were personally attacking the researchers or whatever it is. And what I would say is that I'm definitely I like the idea of doing things that are countercultural, that go against the mainstream and challenge presuppositions that are common in the field. And as long as you do that without hurting anyone or making something super problematic, that's like my really big caveat. I think that this is a cool idea as long as you don't hurt anyone in the process, because that's definitely possible. Um, the example that they provide here is a project that critically examined the normativity of neutral English in current writing systems by creating an autocomplete system with a language model that assumes that you write in the tone of Chuck Tingle, the famous author of absurd sci-fi political satire gay erotica. I'm not going to click on that citation, but you can if you want to. Um, but I think that is an interesting example for me, because I wrote an essay for the book, The Black Agenda. I think the paperback just came out. I can drop a link in the chat for people who are interested. But the essay that I essentially wrote focused on the lack of a consistent language around how we talk about AI and the fact that a lot of the language that we use within the field has a ton of normative assumptions that don't really extend past people who work in the field, especially if you're looking at people who work in overlapping fields like social sciences, or linguistics or psychology or neuroscience or anything like that. And so I think that, terms like hallucination, so language models hallucinating are kind of an example of that, where it's like, that's a very normalized term in AI in the language model space, but it is anthropomorphizing and it has a neuroscientific definition, and to apply that to a language model kind of creates some internal assumptions on what we mean, but also is not clear from the exterior if you're not part of this field. Let's see. Start it up and spin it out. Okay, so the TLDR is ditch academia and make startup. I'll put it like this. Um, if you have the resources to do it, I think two things. One, if you have the resources to do it, I advise a couple startups, and I think it's super interesting to watch the journeys that come with that. Um, Especially if you're putting your own money into it, I should note that it is basically gambling. So like, don't do it because you're passionate about the idea and you want to see where it can go, not because you think that you're going to be a billionaire, because like 99.9% of people are not. And It's super cool if you end up being the 0.1% of people. But like, don't bet on that. Collaborate or jump ship. So this one is collaborate with people with compute and data. God, words. Collaborate with people who have compute and data that you don't have so that you can basically pool resources. This is definitely true. If you're in academia, I think this is probably a good option. I was about to say, the thing that will be a little bit complicated is just the intellectual property side of things, but go talk to your technology licensing office at your institution and they will tell you what you can and cannot do. So it's fine. Somebody in the chat mentioned, would alignment and safety research fall into section 10? Um, I can see an argument for it. I think my main argument against it would be this line. And that's not to say, this is why the reason why I haven't posted in a month is because I've been attempting to make a video on the topic of kind of AGI existential risk, like AI safety and all of these things. And part of the challenge has been Section 10 focuses on solving problems that are in fields that are neither timely nor sexy. And the bet here is that this particular application will become important in the future, either in its own right because it enables something else. So I would argue that AGI risk currently is very sexy. I guess is my pushback on that. I don't think it's timely. I think that that's fair. And I don't think it's timely because it's largely hypothetical. So I, mm, I don't know that I guess when I think about solving problems that few people care about, I think about problems that are currently actionable um, for this section, because the if you focus on this, basically focus on a problem that almost no one sees the importance of, or a method that no one finds promising. One approach is to go looking for applications that people in AI have not seriously, or people have not seriously applied AI to. I think this is the criteria that I'm primarily using for this section, and I don't know that safety and alignment applies here because it is a field that people find very important and that people find very promising and that people are seriously applying AI to. I think that if you kind of remove that factor, this also applies. Um, Looking at things that will be important in the future or because it enables something else or something like that. But I would find it hard to argue that um, few people care about AI risk at the moment, or AGI alignment and safety stuff at the moment. Halcyon Forever commented that co-opting terms from domains that are already not respected by those in AI. It's interesting. Yeah, so this applies to Section 12. I guess the caveat that I didn't explicitly mention here is if you're going to do that, like if you're going to collaborate with people who are not in the field, work with them. Like, don't copy their work or take language from their work and co-opt the terms and turn it into something in AI. Um, there's been a lot of that, and I don't think that the people who did it did so in bad faith. Um, but I do think that a lot of recent work, kind of on the sociology side of AI, has focused on like why there should be more interdisciplinary collaborations that link these definitions and these terms, so that it's not, you lifting words like hallucination from neuroscience to explain what's happening in large language models, and then people on the neuro side being like, that's not that's not what we mean. That's not what we use that word. The public does not understand that word in that way either. Like, it's not it. If everyone, if we talk to the people that we're pulling the language from and make sure that everyone's on the same page, I generally think that's better. 14. Collaborate or jump ship. Oh, no, wait. I already did this section, didn't I? Yes. Share resources. Definitely think that's true. IP gets a little complicated. 15. How can large industry players help? This is super interesting to me. Yeah, at the most basic level, open sourcing models, including weights and training scripts, helps a lot. So I think that this is the two aspects of this section are, one, making things public, which applies to this section, as well as to this section. So in terms of, publishing the technical side of their work, which I think is important to allow academics to interrogate that work, but also, as they mentioned here, it often leaves academics uncompetitive when it comes to actually using those models, just due to the computational resources required to use them in the first place. But also, being open about the plans that they have for the work that they're trying to do. I don't expect this to happen because it's not. There are a couple of reasons why. One is that it's not, from a business perspective, like saying what you're going to do and then letting other people know that so that they can try to beat you to the finish line is usually not a great idea. If they patented it or have intellectual property around it, then like maybe it's doable, but they'd probably be releasing that further into the development process. It's one of those things where, and this is something that I haven't talked about on the channel, and I don't know if that's something that people would be interested in hearing about. I don't like that companies that make large language models don't talk about what's in the data set, or don't publish their plans for releasing the actual model. I also get why they don't. And it is, I guess what I would say, and this isn't to be like super, this isn't to be super left-wing, but also like, I don't know, you watch my channel, you know that I'm like pretty leftist. In a capitalist society, it does not make sense to do that, and so I get it. And like, that's the society that we live in, and I think it's a little bit hard for me to be upset when I see it not happen, because like, at the end of the day, everyone's playing the game. At the same time, I wish they weren't, and I wish they didn't, and that's changed on a level that I don't think is specific to AI work, and I don't know how to make happen. So yeah, if anyone has thoughts on that in the comments, definitely let me know, because that'd be super cool. And then the next step is collaborating with academia. That's definitely something that already happens a lot. In particular, there could be mechanisms where academics initiate collaborations. Yeah, that would be cool. A lot of the collaborations between academia and industry are industry initiated, so it would be really cool if you could initiate from the other side. How can universities help? Let's read. The primary initiative should come from those universities that wish to drive innovation Universities can help their faculty manage the landscape by encouraging and allowing more risk taking. If universities are serious about incentivizing faculty to leverage their competitive advantage, they should roar trying and failing and promoting high risk, high gain funding schemes and research initiatives. Um, I generally agree with this section. I have two thoughts. One is that in academia broadly, there's a culture of not publishing negative results, and I think that sucks. I think that's bullshit, and I think that people should totally do that. So I think that more of that would certainly facilitate progress in AI, but also give academic researchers um, more leverage and more an ability to create space for themselves. I suppose in the landscape of industry kind of domination of the large language model space. Um, the funding part is interesting to me only because one of the earlier sections talked about basically how academics will get like a $50,000 grant, and how like that is like not a meaningful amount of money in this space. And so I guess I'm a little bit curious as to like how much money you like how much funding you need to push towards this, and kind of on the other end of the coin, how much money that would take away from other stuff in the process. So I university should probably avoid making grant funding condition for hires and promotions. I agree with that. Yeah, I'm all for funding agencies leaning more into failure and also just more into to lower profit, I guess is the word that's coming to mind. Like work that isn't going to, if I'm looking at MIT, work that isn't going to make MIT billions of dollars. Um, but yeah, just the financial resources on the academic side are so much lower. So it's hard. Parting words, last section. We wrote this letter with several purposes in mind. First, to share our concerns with other fellow AI researchers with the hope of finding common cause as a community. Second, to offer a set of guidelines based on our own experiences, but also the discussions we've had in the academic and industrial AI venues that we participate or organize. Third, to spur an open dialogue and solicit ideas for potentially more efficient strategies for us all. Arguably, the list of strategies we end up discussing are far from being inclusive of all possibilities that are out there. We believe, however, that they are seeds of a conversation that, in our opinion, is very timely. I do love that the first reference on this is getting rickrolled, and now I do need to go back up and find out what it was linked to. Hold on. Amazing. Incredible. If you click on the GPT-4 citation, you get rickrolled. I love this. I love this paper now. I was, not that I was on the fence about this paper, but I am so happy that that is a thing. So let me jump back and switch to solo camera. Okay. So I think that's a super interesting paper. I'm curious as to what y'all think in the chat, and I'm gonna look very quickly through the comments. Um, yeah, collaboration with universities is always tricky from an IP executive, or from an IP perspective. When I was an exec at Microsoft, I partnered with Stanford, Berkeley, MIT, but had to pass the TOEFL legal. Yeah, it gets really complicated. It's genuinely not easy, and I think I guess I was entertained by this paper partially because it is funny, like it's written in a very funny way. But I was also interested in it because it is a legitimately challenging problem that I don't think we talk about enough. And I think the last section of this paper is a legitimate call to action that I hope that people will respond to because it's a real problem and it's really hard and there isn't a clear solution, and especially given the systems that currently exist that facilitate these kinds of things, there isn't a clear solution. So yeah. um, I don't know if anyone has any other questions, comments in the next minute or so. I know I'm on like a 10-second lag, so I'll give you a minute. Oh, also, if anyone has feedback about the stream, I'm using OBS Studio this time, which has been so much easier to use. I was using Riverside, and that was hard. And OBS lets me like work with things in real time, so that was way better. But if there are things that you had issues with or things that you'd like to see change, definitely also let me know in the chat. I'll give you guys like a minute and also give myself a chance to have a drink. So then, should PhD students go for something that is boring to companies but cool enough for sub-community? I wish I had better advice for this, is what I guess I would say. Um, that might actually turn into a video where I maybe interview some people because, yeah, if you're not going into academia, I feel like actually, so I have my 5-year reunion in less than a week, and one of the people that I'm going to be there with, who's caravanning with me and my friends, is a PhD student at Penn. His name's Harry. He specializes in PL, programming languages, and I would be curious about his thoughts on this. He's pretty active on Twitter. Um, and so maybe if you guys would be interested, I can see if you'd be interested in doing a video on the topic. Because yeah, it's I don't want to say that like you should go for something boring and look for niche communities, because as I've said and learned in many interviews I've done in the last year or so, where people will interview me about AI related things, and then like the article or the podcast comes out like a month later, and it's like, well, things have changed. Like I don't. It's hard for me to say anything that um, if I had to say something now, I would say, do what you're interested in, and hopefully that isn't large language models, because I feel like that's a really saturated field. But I also don't know what like I can't predict the future. But also like it's very hard to predict the future, and that is not something that I am at all able to do. So I'd be super curious. I am an incoming. Oh, the computational sciences and engineering program. Yeah. Oh, well, I mean, MIT has the Lincoln Lab, so I feel like you'll be okay. I feel like there's enough people here who will help you, who can get you into the thing that you want to do. I think you'll be fine. Um, I think I actually know someone who's in the CSE program. I can. I guess I don't. I also don't know if that would be an interesting interview for you guys, but I can ask him if he'd be down to like make a YouTube video, because I know someone who's. I'm a 5th year. I think he's a 4th year in the program, and I don't know what he's planning on doing after, but that could be fun to talk about. Cool. Flagging through other questions. All right. If there are other questions, then I will be happy to answer them in the comments. Um, Otherwise, definitely let me know in the comments if you want to see more lives on things that aren't papers. Yeah, general questions about the field are okay. Um, Let me know in the comments if you want to see more lives. If there are specific topics that you'd love to see me talk about, I'll also be polling people I'll be pulling out on the community page and on Instagram and Twitter and TikTok. So you can follow me over there. And otherwise, I will see y'all in the next video. Bye.